Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Yudalid. Today's daf is sponsored by Mark and Simei Cooper in honor of their 25th wedding anniversary. Today's daf is sponsored by Mark and Becky Goldstein with gratitude to the Almighty, who will, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, celebrate the marriage of their first granddaughter Amiyah to Neriah today. She is kula osif od chuliyah b'shosheret hadorot lebinyana de'ad. Today's daf is sponsored by Hannah Petrokovsky with prayers for the refuah shlema of Michal Naomi Bat Zahav Gita, who is having major surgery for a life-threatening illness. Okay, we're going to get started with our Mishnah. We keep ending with Mishnah at the end of the daf, so we're now going to go back and explain the Mishnah again, just to get us started. We have a Mishnah. We're going to see one of the issues today is going to come up. That's going to come up a lot is the fact that the Mishnayot were written in Eretz Israel in a certain time period, and we're now already a different time period and in a different location in Babylonian when we get to the Gemara, and they no longer know what these things are that the Mishnah is talking about, and they struggle a lot to find what are these items. So the topic of the Mishnah is, what items can you never sell to Gentiles? Forget about during their holidays, but also before their holidays or after their holidays, but also all year round. And that's because these items were generally worshipped by the idol worshippers. So the Mishnah starts off, Elu dvarim asurim limkor lovdei kochavim. Okay, these are things that you cannot sell to them. Itz drubalin ubenot shuach uptot harot ulevona v'tarnagola lavan. Okay, we're going to get back to all these different things. The last one is the easier one to define, which is a white rooster. And now we're going to talk about Rabbi Yehuda's opinion about that. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, mutar limkor lo tarnagol lavan beina tarnagolim. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Tanakh and says, there's a way to sell them, which is if you sell a whole bunch of roosters, and within it you also have a white rooster, that's fine. But if you're selling it on its own, there's another way to do it, which is koteat etzba'o machorlo. Okay, break off one of its fingers, or really, more like toes probably. They don't really have fingers, and sell it. Because they're not going to anyway. Thank you for the word talons. Okay, they're not going to anyway use something that's broken, give a broken animal to their gods, or a broken bird. Ushar kol advarim, everything else, stama mutar pirushan asur, which we explained as if they just buy it for regular, it's fine, everything else. But if they come into your store and say, hey, I want to buy this to worship an idol with, then it's forbidden. All of this, by the way, both this line and the other lines, and the objects that are used for idol worship, are forbidden because of the lifnei iver lo titei machshol. You're basically putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person, because what you're basically doing is you're enabling them very easily, making it easy for them to, or you're basically it's almost direct that you're having the idol worship go on because of you. You're basically selling it to them, and then they're going to go and worship it. So if you don't sell it to them, it's going to be harder for them to do it. Rabbi Meir adds a bunch more things, which we'll get to later. Dakal tav, chatzav, niklav, which really looks like it's niklas and not niklav. We're going to see later in the Gemara. And all those things Rabbi Meir adds are also forbidden. So now the Gemara starts off, top of our daf, my itzrubalin. What are itzrubalin? Tornita. Okay, what is tornita? Good question. There's a big debate here. Rashi says it's a type of cedar tree. It's called the shita. Like I'd say shitim in the Gemara, in the Torah. Like for the Mishkan, the kelim in the Mishkan. Anyway, the problem with Rashi is it's really not going to fit with the continuation of the Gemara, because the Gemara is going to say very shortly that tornita doesn't have roots. Now, what does it mean it doesn't have roots? So Rashi explains it means it doesn't have roots, it doesn't last through the winter. Okay, which means basically like it's one of those things that you have to replant every year. Okay? The problem is, it's a tree. It doesn't really make much sense. Tosfot basically says that this can't be, because it doesn't make sense with the Gemara, it doesn't make sense with some other sugyas, and basically Tosfot suggests that maybe we're just talking about some sort of soil, because it doesn't have roots at all, and maybe that's what it's going to, when it says it doesn't have roots, it must mean they don't have roots at all, and it's some sort of soil. Unclear exactly what this tornita is. Well, we're going to have to go ahead without really fully understanding, but again, I'm just reminding you, Itzrubalim was a term used by the Mishnah, which obviously comes from the Greek, like Itztadion, stadium, and all those words with the itz are from the Greek. Anyway, so they say it's tornita. Uriminu, the Gemara says, can't possibly be tornita. Why not? Well, in a sugya, a totally different sugya, where it talks about the Shemitah year and what does Shemitah apply to, Hosifu alehem alechsin itzrubalin umuchsasin ubnot shuach. So they added to the list of things that are forbidden for the Shemitah year also those 4 things. Ve'isa kadatach itzrubalin tornita. If you're going to say it's tornita meita b'shvi'it, for sure there's no prohibition of shvi'it by tornita. Why? It should be hatanya, not hatanan, because there is no Mishna like this. Tanan means Mishna, Tanya means Braita. It must be taught because it's taught in a Braita. Zah klal, this is the rule. What has all the laws of Shemitah, to what does it apply and to what does it not apply? Kol sheyesh lo ikal, everything that has roots, again, depending on whether you go with Rashi or Tosfot, either it has roots that last through the winter or it has roots in general. Yesh lo shvi'it, then Shemitah laws apply. Kol she'ein lo ikar, ein lo shvi'it. Now, again, if it doesn't have roots, it doesn't have Shemitah, which means, again, however we define tornita, it's clear the Gemara understands that tornita doesn't have roots, whatever this doesn't have roots means. Once it fits into that category, there's no Shemitah for it. Now it said there is Shemitah for itzrubalin. So if itzrubalin equals tornita, well, there should be Shemitah for tornita. So it can't possibly be tornita. Ela amar Rav Safra. Rav Safra explained, Pere da'arza. It means the fruit of the cedar tree. V'chein ke'ata Ravin amar Rabbi Elazar. Pere da'arza. And also when Ravin, now this is important because Ravin came from Israel. I want you to be minded to this during today's sugya, who's from where. Because again, the Mishna was written in Hebrew, again, Hebrew from Greek in this case, okay, but there they had more connection with the Greeks and understood the language better, and it was the language the Mishna chose to use, so obviously the people there then understood what it was. So now when Ravin came from Israel, he said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, who's also from Israel, that it's Peri Da'arza, so that supports Rav Safra's explanation, that it's the fruits from the cedar tree, and that's what it's Itzrubalin are, and those were things that the idols offered. And it's not tornita. Benot shuach. This is much easier to define. Amar Bar Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. I want you to notice this is a Babylonian, but quoting Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yochanan. Te'ene chivarata. These are figs that are white. Okay, white figs. That's what benot shuach are. They come up a lot in the Gemara. Uptotarot. Okay, what is ptotarot? Amar Bar Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Again, quoting Rabbi Yochanan from Israel. Hard a word to say. Can't say it. Biptotrotehen. Okay, I got it. Biptotrotehen shanu. Okay, what does that mean? It means the ptotrot are the stems. It means with their stems. Meaning, the ptotrot is not another item. When you read this list, these are things asurim limkor, itzrubalin, benot shuach, uptotrot, which means with their stems. Meaning, if you sell the white figs or the itzrubalin, the fruits from the cedar tree, with their stems, then it's forbidden. Because why? They would hang it next to their idols on their stem, or somehow the stem was relevant. If it didn't have stems, then they weren't going to be using it to offer to their idols, and then you could actually sell them. So if you take off the stems, then you actually can sell it to them. Livona, frankincense. Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, again quoting someone from Israel, right? Both are Israel. Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish from Israel. Livona zakah, pure frankincense. Okay, that's the type of frankincense that they would offer. Tan. Now we're going to learn not just what you can sell or can't sell, but in items that you can't sell, there are certain ways that you can sell them. So Tana, the Braita, says, Umikula mochrim lem chavila. You can sell them a package of them. Because when they're offering them to their gods, they're going to offer them, one or two or something. But if you're selling a lot, then that's a different story. The kama chavila, how much is considered a chavila? So Perish Rabbi Yonah ben Betera, en chavila pchuta mishlosha manim. Okay, we're not going to have, 1 second, I just want to check one thing. Right, it's going to be 3 maneh, okay? Anything less than 3 maneh is 100, right? It's a weight of 100 zuzim. So anything less than 300 zuzim's worth is not a chavila, but more than that, okay, once you have that amount, it's already a lot. And then why is that permitted? Because they're obviously going to resell it. They're buying it to sell. Okay, they're not buying it to use. Okay, and if they're buying it to sell, it's permitted. Now we're going to say, why is it permitted? Who are they going to sell it to if not to people who are going to worship idols? So you're indirectly causing lifnei iver, right? You're eventually you sell it to this person. This person will sell to the Gentiles. Right? We're worried they're going to offer it. They're going to sell it to other people who are going to offer it up to their gods. Rabbi, very interesting. Alifnei mifakdinan, alifnei de lifnei lo mifakdinan. We're commanded on lifnei iver lo titei mechshol. Don't put a stumbling block before a blind person. Don't directly cause someone to do a sin. However, to cause someone else to do it is already permitted. That's already not our problem. Okay, right? To what extent do you have to worry? Not that someone else is going to cause someone else. That's already not your issue. It's only lifnei iver, not lifnei iver. Okay. Tarnagol lavan. Now we want to understand this white rooster and also understand the machloka between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. But first we're going to start with a statement of Rabbi Yona. Okay, Amar Rabbi Yona, Amar Rabbi Zarah, Amar Rav Zvid. According to the first version, it was passed down from Rabbi Yona, passed down Rabbi Zarah, who passed down what Rav Zvid said about this. V'ika dematne, some people say Amar Rabbi Yona, Amar Rabbi Zarah, without Rav Zvid. Tarnagol lemi. If somebody says, who has a tarnagol to sell? Now, before we start this, I want you to understand this is also important for today, and there's two main important things I think we get out of today. One is in terms of the reality of their day. One is that often there are terms in the Mishna that the people in the Gemara didn't understand. That's going to come up over and over again today. Number two, we have the way they used to sell things is not the way we sell things nowadays. Okay, we already saw yesterday that sometimes they bought from storekeepers or peddlers. Sometimes they bought from household owners. And that the whole shuk was very different. Okay, it wasn't necessarily that you went to the shuk and everybody had inventory and they sold whatever they had. No, often you would go to someone and ask them, are you willing to sell it to me? And sometimes people would be, sometimes people wouldn't be. And basically there's different styles of how people sold things. And many times, probably more than the average, it's not that everything somebody had was necessarily up for sale, but people would say, are you willing to sell me this? So if somebody comes to you and says, I'm looking for a tarnagol to buy. And they're asking tarnagol lemi, right? As opposed to, you go to the shuk. If you go to, let's say, the shuk in Machane Yehuda, everyone's screaming tomatoes for this amount and this for this amount. Is the opposite. Somebody comes into the shuk and starts screaming, tarnagol, who's selling me a tarnagol, who's selling me a rooster. So if somebody comes into the shuk and says, we're looking for someone to sell, comes to your door, knocking on your door, and again, instead of trying to sell you something, knocking on your door, they come saying, I want to buy a tarnagol, without saying white. Mutar limkor lo tarnagol lavan. Okay, so Rabbi Yona says, if somebody says, I'm looking for a tarnagol, sell him a white one, because he's obviously not looking, or she's obviously not looking for a specific white one. They're looking for a tarnagol. If they wanted to worship it, they would have said white one. Number two, tarnagol lavan lemi. Case two is somebody comes looking for a white tarnagol. Okay, asur limkor lo tarnagol lavan. That's pretty clear. If they're looking specifically for a white one, well, then you can't sell it to them, because obviously we're just going to assume they want it for idol worship. But now we're going to have a difficulty with this based on what it says in our Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mochir Hulo, Tarnagol Laban Bena Tarnagolim. So now remember, we have a Machloket, Rabbi Yehuda and Tanakama. Tanakama says, you can't sell a Tarnagol Laban with a whole bunch of others. And Rabbi Yehuda says, you can. If it's mixed in with a whole bunch of others, you can sell it. The question is, what's the situation here? Hey Chidami. It's either going to be Tarnagol Lemi or Tarnagol Laban Lemi. In other words, we have these two situations that Rabbi Yona described. Either the person comes to the shuk just looking for a random Tarnagol, or the person goes in looking for a specific white one. So let's try to figure out the machlok of Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, which case is it in? And we're actually going to see it doesn't fit with either case. Hechidami, and that's the difficulty here on Rabbi Yona, because based on what Rabbi Yona said, neither one fits in with the Mishnah. If it's that the person said, I'm looking for specifically a tarnagol lavan lemi, okay, they say it twice, afilu be'ena tarnagolim nami lo. Rabbi Yehuda shouldn't allow you to sell white and red ones together because the person was specifically looking for a white one. Obviously, they want to worship. So what, that they took a few red ones as well, but they're obviously looking to worship and you're selling them a white one. Elalav, but if you say it's not that, it's to Amr Tarnagol Lami. If they said Tarnagol Lami, then Tarnagol Lami, right? If they said Tarnagol Lami, Afilu Hachi LeRabbi Yehuda Beina Tarnagolim In Bifnei Atzmo Lo. Now, according to this, what are we saying? That Bein HaTarnagolim. Okay, so now let's read the way they say this. If so, somebody says Tarnagol Lavan Lami, Tarnagol Lami. Now, what do we say? If you say Tarnagol Lami, then we're going to basically assume that it's fine. But we're going to notice now that nobody thinks it's fine if you're selling just a white one. Now, that's not what Rabbi Yona said. Rabbi Yona said if they come in randomly looking for a Tarnagol, of course you could sell them a Tarnagol Lavan because they're obviously not looking for idol worship. They would have just said Tarnagol Lavan if they were looking. But now we're going to see if you say that the Mishna is talking about a case of Tarnagol Lami where they just said it randomly, well, even Rabbi Yehuda, who permits to sell with other Tarnagolim, doesn't permit it by itself, right? That's what we're going to read here. Afilu hachi, even so, Rabbi Yehuda beina Tarnagolim, but bifnei atzmo lo, won't allow you to sell just one. And the Tanakama afilu beina Tarnagolim nami lo, and the rabbis and the Tanakama doesn't permit it at all. So that doesn't match what Rabbi Yona said. So basically, the Mishnah doesn't fit either case. So what could be the case? So either Rabbi Yona has a problem here because it doesn't fit in with the Mishnah, or maybe the case in the Mishnah is some third possibility, and that's what we're going to say. So now, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, ha chabamayaskinam, what's the case? Kigon da Amar zeh v'zeh. The Mishnah is when someone, and now there's a debate exactly how to understand this case. Either someone said, I want a white one and a red one, okay, and they mentioned two, or perhaps they just pointed to two, and one was red, one was white. I'm just using red as an example. Okay, so let's go with that interpretation. That the Mishnah is talking about when someone comes into the shuk and they say, I want that one and that one. One is white, one is red. And so Tanakama says, look, they pointed to the white one, so maybe they really want the white one to worship, and therefore you can't sell them both the white and the red. But Rabbi Yonah says, no, since they were mixing the white and the red one, obviously they don't want it for idol worship purposes, because otherwise they would have just bought the white one, and therefore you can do it. And that's the machloket. And in fact, Tanya Namihachi, we're going to bring a braita to support this reading. So that was basically the way we explained the Mishnah in order to make it fit with what Rabbi Yonah said. And now we're going to see a braita that proves that that's what Rabbi Yehuda said, because this is going to be Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, matan. When is it forbidden? Bizman sha'amar tarnagol zeh lavan. Someone says, this white rooster I want, then it's forbidden. Avalim amal zeh v'zeh mutar. And here you have it exactly. If they say I want this one, and one happens to be white, but one is not, then you're going to be allowed to do it. And the braita is going to continue. Va'afilu amar. Now it's a little. We don't need this anymore. We brought this just to prove Rabbi Yehuda, but we're going to learn the rest of the braita anyway. Afilu amar tarnagol zeh. Now, in a case, we're even going to have another case where somebody points and says, I want this one, and it's white. But it was ovei kochavim sha'asa mishtel b'no. If he was making a party for his son, which we assume now usually means for the son's wedding, shayach chole betoch beito, or he had someone sick in his house, mutal, because apparently for wedding celebrations, people would specifically want white roosters, and not to worship idols with, but to serve to their guests. And if someone was sick, apparently they use this as a remedy. Okay, we've learned some of these remedies with white roosters, and perhaps they wanted it specifically for that, and therefore you're actually allowed to sell it to them, because in that case, we have reason to believe that you're needing it for something else and not for idol worship, and therefore it can be sold. Now, the Gemara is going to have a problem with that source, because Vahatanya, didn't it say, it's actually Hatnan, it said in our Mishna, if you remember, if you remember, what did we learn? A Gentile who's doing a wedding for his son, you're not allowed to sell to that person and on that day. Right? You can sell to anyone else on that day, but not to that person and not on that day. Now, it says it's only forbidden to sell to that person that day, but it is forbidden to sell to that person in that day. Anything, remember? You can't sell them anything on the day of their wedding. And to that person, why? Because chances are they're going to offer it up to their gods at the wedding celebration, or they're going to thank their gods for it. you're not allowed to do any business with anyone on their wedding day. So how could you say that if the person's buying it and he's doing a wedding for his son, forget the white rooster, you can't sell them anything. So how do we allow you to sell this white rooster for the person who's doing a wedding celebration for his son? So they say, okay, we must have misunderstood what we were talking about. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Misharshia bitavzig. Okay, again, a term that we don't really know what that means, but the commentary is, again, by the way, besides that the Mishna didn't always understand, the Gemara wasn't always understand, the rabbis of the Gemara didn't always understand what the Mishna was talking about. The Rishonim don't always understand the words that the Gemara is using. So tavzig, unclear what it is. Maybe it's some sort of party that people do for social purposes. In other words, he was making a party for his son with his friends to celebrate whatever it might be. Okay, we're in graduation season or I don't know what, but there was a party. It wasn't a party for a wedding. In a wedding, you have to be worried about idol worship. This is saying there were often parties people would make and they would buy white roosters for them, but it wasn't wedding celebrations, because if it was wedding celebrations, you can't even sell anything. Forget about the white rooster. Okay, that was all within. Okay, so what happened here? We started with this statement of Rabbi Yona that basically he's distinguished between turnigol zeh, when the person's just looking for a random turnigol, you can even sell a white one. If they're looking specifically for a white one, then you can't even sell them at all, right? Because they're obviously looking specifically for a white one. And then the case in the Mishna where Rabbi Yehuda permits selling them with a whole bunch of other kinds, that would have to be zeh v'zeh. Okay, now we're going to get to another difficulty. Tanan. It says in our Mishnah, Ushar kol hadvarim stama mutar perushan asul. Now, we don't yet know the difficulty, but my stamanu my perushan, the first explanation of what this means, right? This is everything else that's not necessarily specifically used for idol worship, but it sounds like what it's trying to tell you is this. And they're going to do it with an ilema, though. This doesn't really make any sense, even though it does seem the most intuitive. If you say stam means you say, I want white wheat, white grains of wheat, perushan de ka'amar l'avodah zarah, and then explaining them in detail or being specific would mean I want them to worship idols with, which is what we explained, right? They're just giving an example of white wheat, okay? And then you say, and I want them, though, to worship idols, then it's forbidden. Well, lo stamen tzricha lemeimar de zamanina, but lo perushan tzricha lemeimar de lomas davnina. This is so obvious, the Mishna does not need to tell you this. If somebody goes to the store and buys something random, of course they can buy it. If it's not something normally people use for worship, they can buy it. If they come into your store and they say, I specifically want this for idol worship, of course you can't sell it to them. What more lifnei iver is than that? So we don't need a Mishna to tell us that. So that must not be the understanding of the Mishna. In which case, what must it be? Elastamin de ka'amar chite, perushan de amar chivarata. Stam means, and then now you understand why they gave this example of white wheat, because now we're going to split the wheat and the white. If you just say wheat, you're allowed to sell it. But if it's white wheat, you're not allowed to sell it. Now, because if someone's looking, now the assumption here is, we're going to reject this, don't worry, it's a weird assumption. The assumption is if the person's being specific about something, they want something very specific, maybe it's because they wanted to offer to their idols. Which means, okay, now we're going to go back to Rabbi Yona, which means, Michlal de Tarnagol Lavan, de Tarnagol, afilu stama nami lo. Now it sounds like the Tarnagol, even if you don't specify, right? You don't say, I want a Tarnagol Lavan, sounds like it would be forbidden also, because again, the Mishna is making distinctions between the Tarnagol Lavan and the things in that category, the strubalin and all that, versus everything else. If everything else, when you get specific, it's forbidden, but if you're not specific in your general, it's permitted, but that's different from all these other items, which sounds like if you're general about them, like you didn't specify white rooster, you just said, I want a rooster, sounds like we're worried you're using it for idol worship, and you can't sell it. And that goes against what Rabbi Yona said. It's also not really so intuitive. I mean, people buy roosters for all sorts of reasons. But that's what we're going to assume right now is what they're saying. That the assumption is, if, again, it's all based on how you understand stam and perush. If perush means a specific type, then Tarnagol Lavan, even if you don't specify a specific type, it's going to be forbidden no matter what. What would not be specifying? Just saying Tarnagol and not Lavan. Okay? But they say no. We don't, and then Rabbi Yona makes no sense, because he said if they're just looking for a random Tarnagol, of course you can even sell them a Tarnagol Lavan. So now they say, Amre la'olam stamanda ka'amre chite chibrata. Perushan de ka'amre la'avodah zarah. Okay, we're back to what we thought, which we thought was totally obvious, but now we're going to explain why it wasn't so obvious. And we're going to see how the Gemara gets very creative here. So, stam means you said, I want white grains or whatever you said you want. And perushan is you said, I want them to worship idols with. Okay? And that would be forbidden to sell them. Even though they're not normally something they offer to their gods, once they say that, of course, you can't sell it. Uperushan itzrichale. Now, they needed to tell you that if a guy comes into your store and says, I want to buy this for idol worship, you cannot sell it. Now, why would you think you could? Well, salkadat tachamin, and here comes the creativity. Hi, gavra lav lavodah zarah kabai. Maybe this person who came into your store is really not interested in these white wheat for idol worship. But elamei bakhuda avik bavodah zarah. First of all, he's someone who's very into avodah zarah. V'savar ki echi dehu gavra avik bei kulei amanami aviku. And he assumes that because this is a good assumption about people, when you're so steeped in something, you assume everybody else thinks like you. So you assume that everybody else is just like you and loves avodah zarah. So when this person walks into the store and wants to buy white wheat, not for avodah zarah purposes, but now this is again, I told you have to go back and think about the way they sold things in those days. Now, often the way people sold things was somebody offered them to, can I buy this from you? And then they had to decide, do I want to sell it to you or do I want to keep it for myself? Okay, it wasn't like they had inventory they had to get rid of and they wanted to sell. Not like they had a store. Somebody knocks on your door and says, will you sell me the white grains you have? So now the question is, do I want to sell it or not, right? And the question is, as opposed to the salesman who knocks on your door or saleswoman who wants to sell you something, here we have the same idea. We have a buyer who wants to basically get you to sell it to them. So how are they going to market it? They're going to say, oh, well, I love avodah zarah, and I know that probably they love avodah zarah. Now, either they didn't know I was Jewish, or they thought maybe I'm a Jew who loves idols also. So what do they say? They say, Kule amanami aviku, right? So again, kiechi de gavra avik be, kule amanami aviku, just like I'm, the person says, just like I love avodah zarah, everyone else does. So emahachi, so I'll say I want it for idol worship, kiechi de litvule, so that you'll sell it to, so that I'll sell it to them. Okay, so they come knocking on my door, they say, oh, I need this for my idol. And they figure I'm going to sell it to them because I also believe in idol worship. And maybe they don't really want it for idol worship, but maybe I can actually sell it because it's just a marketing tool. Again, marketing in the reverse direction that we usually market, but marketing to get someone to sell them something. Kamash malan, that's why the Mishna needs to tell you, no. If they say they want it for avodah zarah, you have to be concerned that they want it for avodah zarah and that they're not just trying to dupe you into selling it to them. Okay, we're going to get into something now in the reverse direction, but the same kind of idea. By Rav Ashi, Ternigol lavan katua lemi. So if somebody comes and says, I want a ternigol lavan, that their talons are cut off. Mahu limkor lo ternigol lavan shalem. Can I sell them a full one? Okay, a complete one. So now you're wondering, why would you do that or why? Okay, what's going on here? Well, mi amrina, do we say, mi de ka'amar katua. So again, you knock on my door and you say, can I have a ternigol lavan katua? Okay? Lav lavodah zarah kabai. Can I just assume that you obviously don't want it for idol worship because you say you want a broken one? O dilma iarume kama arim. Or maybe you're trying to trick me. Because what's the trick here? Well, if I have white roosters, probably most white roosters don't have cut off talons, which means that it's unlikely I have what you're looking for. Which means if you ask me for a ternigol lavan katua, I'll probably offer you a whole one. And that, you figure, is a good way. Now, in this case, I see you're writing, what about the mezuzah on the door, right? In this case, saw the mezuzah on the door, knows you're Jewish, knows that you're not going to sell it to me, knows that they're not going to sell it to them if they want it for their idols. So they claim they're looking for one with a broken leg. But they know that you're probably not going to have one. They're playing a game here, right? Maybe you do it. Maybe you're going to pull out one and sell it to them. But you're probably going to say, oh, I don't have that, but I actually have a complete one. So if they ask for a broken one, are we worried that they're just trying to trick you? Now, it's different. I see you're asking, Tavara, about a red and a white one. It's different because if they're asking for a red one, you probably have a red one, but you probably don't have one that's broken, okay? So that's not whole. So therefore, the fact that they're asking this makes us think that you might be actually tricking them. Okay, so can you sell them a white whole one? That's the question. And this is going to have a second part, intim tzelomar, which is usually, we don't know the answer to the first question, but let's suggest, if you want to say, hi, arume kamarim, we do have to worry that they're trying to trick you. Tarnagol lavan lami, what if they ask you, do you have a tarnagol lavan, do you have a tarnagol lavan, which we already know you can't sell a white one too, but yave le shachor ushkal, v'yave le adom ushkal, but you happen to give them either a black one or a red one. So they come asking for a white one, you say, I'll give you a red one or a black one, and they take it. And they say, oh, great, I'll take that as well. And then they ask again for a white one. Can you give them a white one now? Ma'ulin korlo lavan, can you sell them a white one now? Mi amrina, do we say, kevan diavi shachor ushkal, adom ushkal, lav avodah zarah kabai? Can we assume that since you took the black one or the red one instead of the white one that you asked for, you obviously don't care and you're not trying to use it for idol worship because nobody offers the red or black ones for idols. O dilma iruma kama arim. Or, again, how much do we think that you're trying to dupe me into something? Do we think that maybe you took it on the first sale, figuring once I take the black or the red one, oh, the Jew will assume I'm not using it for idol worship, and then later they'll sell me a white one? Or not? And the answer is, Teku, we don't have an answer. Rabbi Meir Omer, Af Dekel. Now we're going to get to the Dekel Tav and the Niklas and the things at the end of the Mishnah that Rabbi Meir added to the list of items that are worshipped. Amar le Rav Chisda l'Avime. Gemire, there's a very funny line, Avodah Zarah da Avram Avinu arba mea pirkin havyan. Okay, we have a tradition that Avram Avinu's Masechet Avodah Zarah had 400 chapters in it. Okay, it's kind of funny because first of all, Avram Avinu didn't have a Gemara, right? He didn't have a Masechet of Mishna, and 400 chapters. What kind of Masechet is 400 chapters? But they're trying to say, first of all, Avram Avinu lived in the world of pagans, right? That was what was going on in his time. I think what they mean is, he knew a lot about Avodah Zarah, but more like there was a lot for him to learn about Avodah Zarah, way more than we need to learn. I think it's also kind of saying that paganism was much bigger in those days, and there were many more types, and now maybe there's less to know about it because there's less Avodah Zarah than there was then. Okay, anyway, I'm not sure, but it's an interesting line. Anyway, he was trying to get to the fact that Anan Chamshatnan, okay, we only have 5 chapters. V'lo yadina ma'ika amrina, and we still don't understand anything. Okay, it's a great line. He's basically saying, we only have 5 chapters on Avram, have 400 to learn, and of the 5 chapters, there's so much that we don't understand. So my kasha, what didn't he understand? De Katani, again, this is Rav Chisda in Babylonia, right? Not understanding what it was talking about in the Mishnah. So what didn't he understand? Rabbi Meir Omer, Af Dekel Tav, Chatzav, B'Niklas, Asur L'Korlov De Kochavim. So it sounds like Dekel Tav Hu Delom Zavninan, Ha Dekel Bishma Zavninan. It sounds like you can't sell a good Dekel tree, a good palm tree, but you can sell a bad one because it only says a good one you can't sell. V'hatnan, but doesn't it say in another Mishnah, we're going to get to later, Ein mochrim lehem b'mechubar lekarka. You can't sell anything to Gentiles that are attached to the ground. Now, this is a different issue. This is you can't sell the land in Israel, and land means anything attached to the ground like trees as well. And this is because of the Isur of Lo Techanem. You shouldn't be selling land in Israel to Gentiles. We're going to get to all this in this fascinating, comes up in politics these days, about selling land to Gentiles in Israel. Anyway, issue, we'll put that aside right now, but then how can you sell them bad trees? You can't sell them any trees because trees are attached to the ground, and they should be part of that prohibition of not selling to Gentiles. So Amar Le, my Dekel Tav, Pero Dekel Tav. So Avimi explains to Rav Chisda, oh, that's difficult for you? Dekel Tav doesn't mean the tree, it means the fruits. It means good dates, good dates you can't sell them, bad dates you can sell. Because the good dates they'll offer up to their gods. V'chein Amar Rav Huna, and Rav Huna also explained this, Pero Dekel Tav. Okay, and now we explain what that means. Chatzav. Chatzav is kashba, which is a type of dates also. Niklas, Okay, here you see it's niklas, not niklav, like it said in our Gemara, in our Mishna. Ki ata Rav Dimi, again, it's Rav Dimi who's coming from Israel, who's telling them what this is. Amar Rav Chamar bar Yosef, koryate. Okay, this is koryate, that doesn't help us very much, and in fact, it didn't help Abaye either. So Amar le Abaye, here's a very funny conversation also. Amar le Abaye le Rav Dimi, tna niklas v'lo yadanu mayu. It said niklas, and we didn't understand what that meant. Va'at amart koryate, and you explained it with this word koryate, v'lo yadina, and I don't know what that means either, so that didn't really help me. Mayahanetle, like what if you help me, basically? You haven't helped me at all by defining it with another word that I don't know what that means either. So what's Rav Dimi's response? Amarle, ahane lechu, I did help you. I'll explain to you why. Dechi azal tatam, because when you get to Israel, amrat la niklas, and you say to someone niklas, v'lo yade, and they don't know what it is, but amrat lu koryate v'yade, but you'll say the word koryate and they'll know what it is, v'kamach fulach, and they'll show you exactly what it is. So this is showing that it's not just geographical, but it's also time goes by, people use different terms for different things. So the words in the Mishnah already were different than the words in the time of the Gemara in Israel. So Rav Dimi tells Abaye, this is the modern day use of the word, the modern day word that they use, koryate, and when you get to Israel and you want to know what it is, say koryate, don't say niklas, because they won't know what it means, and therefore I have helped you. Okay, here's, right, this is when you needed, like, Dimi to have his phone with his picture of what it is, right? In those days, they didn't have that kind of thing, so we couldn't really tell him what it was. The fruits obviously didn't exist in Babylonia, but he says, when you get to Israel, you'll say koryate, and you'll know what it is. Okay. Mishna. Makom shenagu limkor be'emad kalov de kochavim mochrim. Makom shenagu shalom limkor mochrim. So now we're going to talk about be'emot hakot, be'emot gasot. Small animals, large animals, and we're getting into a totally different topic. It has to do with things you can sell to Gentiles, and that's why it's here, or things you can't sell, but not because of Avodah Zarah, because of other issues. So the biggest issue besides Avodah Zarah that we talk about Gentiles engaging in was bestiality. So another lifnei iver is that you can't sell them small animals. Now we're going to see, it all depends on makom shenagu. There's some places where you can, there's some places where you can't. And the concern is that the Gentile might engage in bestiality with the animal, in which case you're going to be, again, lifnei iver lo titei mechshol. Also one of the things they're not allowed to do. And if you sell it to them, you're going to basically be causing them to engage in bestiality. So, therefore, now here it's a little bit weird. Why does it depend on minhag hamakom then? We're going to get to that in the Gemara. Okay? Now, from this, we're going to get off on a totally different topic, which is ubekol makom, in any case, any situation, you can't sell them any large animals, or even their young, the calves, whether they're whole or even whether they're broken, because they use them to work. Okay? Even broken ones they would use for the millstones, and the ones that were complete they would use for plowing, all sorts of things. Those were the animals they worked with, the large animals. So you can't sell them. Now, why not? So what? What if they work with them? Well, actually, there's really no prohibition, but it's a rabbinic prohibition because you might come to rent them or to loan them. Okay, if you allow selling, you might think that you can rent or loan. Now, renting and loaning is a problem because on Shabbat we're commanded, remember, like in Kiddush we say, on Shabbat morning, Zachor Yom Shabbat L'Kadsho, etc., also, your animals can't work on Shabbat. If you rent or loan your animals to a Gentile, then your animal will work on Shabbat, and that's forbidden for you. Your animals can't work on Shabbat even if they're not in your domain. Now, if you sell them, they're not yours anymore. They can work on Shabbat. But we don't allow selling because you might then rent or loan. Okay? Now, Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to have two different opinions here. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shvua. He says if they're maimed, you can use them. You can sell them because they can't really do much work. Okay, even though we said they could use the millstone, okay, maybe there's a debate about whether they can or can't. Ben betera matir b'sus. A horse, what do people use it for? For riding on. That's not really work. It's only asur midurabanan on Shabbat. So because it's only forbidden durabanan, we're not going to forbid you to sell because maybe you'll rent and then your animal will ride on Shabbat. It's only rabbinic anyway, so we're not going to make a gzeira on a duraban. So the Gemara starts off. We're going to get to the Be'emot Gasot later. The Gemara starts off at the Be'emot Daka. and this issue of makom shenagu. And they say, why is this dependent on makom shenagu? L'meimra di isura leka minhagahu diika. Are you saying it's not really a prohibition? It's just a minhag, depending on the custom? Hecha dinag isur nag, hecha dinag heter nag. Like if people don't do it, then you can't do it. If people do it, you can do it. But how could that be? Urimini, this contradicts the following Mishnah. Ein mamidim mitzan, I think daf kaf bet. Ein mamidim be'ema b'punda ka'ot shel ovdei kochavim. If you go into an inn at night and you leave your animal with the Gentile, okay, you put your animal like in their stable and you leave him alone with the Gentile. This is what we call yichud. Yichud usually is an issue of man and woman, but here it's man and animal. Then you're not allowed to do that because we're worried they're going to engage in bestiality. So if it's forbidden to have allow your animal to be mityached with this Gentile because basically you're going to cause them to engage in bestiality, or it's likely they will, and then you're over on lifnei iver lo titei mechshol, putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. So it sounds like it's prohibited. So if it's prohibited, then why would our Mishnah not say it's prohibited? And yet says it depends on the custom of the land. And what's the custom dependent on? So Amarav, makom shitiru limkor, itiru liached, makom she'asru liached, asru limkor. So they say, oh, that Mishnah is also dependent on minhag hamakom. And what's the minhag hamakom? What's that dependent on? Whether the Gentiles in your area engage in bestiality or not. We're now going to learn that bestiality wasn't the kind of thing that all the idol worshippers engaged in. Some places it was customary that they were engaged in bestiality, and some places it wasn't. So both this Mishnah and that Mishnah, even though that Mishnah didn't say so, but both Mishnayot are dependent on minhag hamakom according to Rav. And then there's no contradiction because it all fits in nicely together. With that, we finished our daf. We're going to continue on with this topic. Tomorrow, what we did today was we talked about all these items that you can't sell to Gentiles because they use them for idol worship. But then we discussed, number one, what are these items? We had a lot of work trying to define them, both the ones in the Mishnah by Tanakama and the ones that Rabbi Meir added. And then we also dealt with, and again, dealing with grappling with the issue of the amoraim not understanding the language the Tanaim used, and not the reality because they're not living in the same place. Then we had all sorts of ways that you can sell depending on the amount, because then it's lifnei iver on lifnei iver, right? It's already more removed. We talked about selling if it's mixed up with other animals, or if they say a certain thing, are we assuming they're trying to trick you into something, or are we not assuming they're trying to trick you into something? Depending on what language they use. If they say turn to gold, in general, I'm looking for, then maybe you can sell them a white one. If they say turn to gold, zeh v'zeh. Okay, we had all these different possibilities of what it is, and we ended with this issue of two new issues. Concern for bestiality, which is really dependent on minhag hamakom, so perhaps you can't sell them small animals, and big animals, an issue of shvitat behema on Shabbat. And with that, we'll finish for today, wishing everyone a good day.